The water was still running when I found my daughter in the tub. Her chin had slipped under the surface, and her eyes were half open and aimed at nothing, and the only proof I had that she was still alive was a thin string of bubbles coming out of the corner of her mouth. Downstairs, my wife was laughing on a video call. There was a fig candle burning in my kitchen and music playing and fresh flowers on the counter, and nobody in that beautiful house thought one single thing was wrong. I'm 61 years old. I have carried steel plate and core samples in my own father's casket, and I want to tell you honestly that nothing in my life ever weighed what my 9-year-old weighed coming out of that water. My name is Owen Marchetti. I spent 34 years as a forensic structural engineer, which is a fancy way of saying people paid me to walk under things that were about to fall down and tell them why. Bridges, port cranes, parking decks. And the first sentence out of my mouth in every deposition I ever sat for was this one: a structure never fails all at once. That's a myth. A bridge doesn't wake up one morning and decide to come apart. It fails in tiny pieces over years. A hairline crack, a bolt working loose, a drain nobody cleared, and every single one of those small failures leaves a record somewhere, if a person bothered to write it down. The collapse is never the event. The collapse is the last page of a document nobody read. I built a career on that sentence. Then I went home and lived inside a house where every warning was filed correctly, and nobody read a single page, because reading them was nobody's particular job. I wasn't supposed to be home that night. I was in Norfolk on a container terminal inspection, 11 days, and the client's lawyers got nervous and closed the job early. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to walk through the door and watch Nell's face when she noticed me standing there. At my age, you start collecting those. You start understanding exactly how many of them you've got left. I got one, all right. Let me tell you about my knees for a second, because it matters. I got down on that bathroom tile in about a quarter of a second, and I stayed down, and I hooked my forearms under her arms and hauled her up out of that water against my chest, and my back went somewhere I didn't have time to think about. Her hair was plastered to my shirt. Her head hung back like the muscles in her neck had gone off somewhere. Her skin was cold. And her breathing. This is the part that still gets me at 3 a.m. This is the part I'll take with me. Her breathing was there, but it was slow and shallow and so terribly patient, like it wasn't in any hurry to keep her. She was 9 years old. She'd lost 2 teeth that month. I said her name. I said it a lot of times. She didn't answer any of them. I want to stop and tell you something before I go further, because I think you deserve to know who's talking to you. I was 52 when Nell was born. Her mother, Elena, died when Nell was 5.5 pancreatic, 4 months from diagnosis to the funeral, no time to get used to anything. And I married Adrian 2 years after that, and everybody I knew told me it was a wonderful thing. She was 35 then. I was 59. My son from my first marriage, Deacon, who is 36 and builds custom cabinets in Savannah, drove down for that wedding and stood out in the parking lot with me before it started and said, "Dad, she's good with Nell in front of you." That's it. That's the whole warning. 9 words in a parking lot. I told him he was being unfair. I told him he was protecting his mother's memory. And then I told him he was protecting Elena's memory. And I said both those things in the same breath without noticing they contradicted each other. That is what a lonely man does when somebody hands him a family and he doesn't want to look at it too closely. I'll come back to that. Right now there's a girl on a bathroom floor. I shouted, and Adrian came up the stairs holding her phone against her chest with the screen still lit, and she looked at her husband kneeling on wet tile with an unconscious child in his arms, and she said, "Oh, she's fine." Not a scream, not a run, not one broken syllable. "She's fine, Owen. She does this." I asked what this meant. She sighed. She actually stood there and sighed at me. She said Nell had been impossible since school let out, that she'd run herself a bath to calm down, that she was very likely faking, that she was a dramatic little girl who had learned exactly which buttons to push and when. And here's what I understood in that second, without being able to prove one word of it. I wasn't being handed a panic. I was being handed a story, written in advance, ready to go. I called 911 with one hand and held my daughter's head off the tile with the other. Adrian stepped toward me and said, very quietly, "Don't build this into something it isn't. I'm going to be honest with you the way I'd want somebody to be honest with me. 30 years ago, I say something in that hallway that I can't take back. 30 years ago, I'm on my feet, and my voice is up, and the whole thing goes a completely different direction. The only reason I didn't is that I have been wrong loudly enough times in my life to know exactly what it costs. That's not wisdom. Don't give me credit for wisdom. It's just scar tissue. Old men are quiet because we've already paid for the noise. The ambulance came in about 9 minutes. 2 medics, a driver, a bag, a board. The one running it was a woman named Marisol Vega, mid-50s, gray coming in at the temples, hands that had clearly been doing this since before some of the equipment in that bag was invented. She got oxygen on Nell, and questions going at the same time. Any conditions? None. Any allergies? None. Any medication? I said no. And from the doorway, Adrian said, "She takes something for her allergies sometimes." Marisol's head came around. Slow. "What does she take?" "Just the regular stuff. Over the counter." "How much today?" "I wouldn't know." I need you to see that woman's face the way I saw it. It was the exact expression I've worn 100 times myself, standing over a set of numbers I already know are wrong. She looked down at my daughter. Then she looked at the staircase. Then the landing, the bathroom door, the window at the end of the hall. She wasn't examining a scene. She was comparing it to one. Then she looked at me and said, "Have we met?" I said no. She said, "Are you sure?" And something went cold and heavy underneath my ribs, because I was sure, and the question kept coming anyway. They got Nell on the stretcher. Her eyelids fluttered going down the stairs and never opened. Adrian said she'd follow in her own car because she needed to change clothes. I looked at my unconscious daughter, and then at my wife's outfit, and I did not trust my own mouth enough to answer her. Out in the driveway, Marisol Vega stopped me with 2 fingers on my forearm before I could get in the back. "Mr. Marchetti, you said we've never met." "We haven't." "No," she said. "Maybe we haven't." Then she nodded at my house. The whole thing, the shutters, the crepe myrtle, the porch light I put in myself. But I've been inside that one before. I asked when. She said, "November." Your daughter was unconscious then too. Everything I thought I knew about my own address came apart in the length of that sentence. If you have ever found out, after the fact, that something enormous happened to somebody you love while you were somewhere else holding a coffee, taking a call, laughing at something on an airplane, then you already know the exact flavor of what hit me in that driveway. It isn't grief. Not yet. It's vertigo. It's finding out there was a version of your own life running without you in it. People made decisions about your child in that version. They filled out forms. They closed a file. And your name was never on the list of people to call. That's what got me. Not the crime. The editing. November. I was in Duluth. 8 days on a lift bridge in weather that made my hands ache for a month afterward. I remember that trip perfectly because I bought Nell a stuffed lake sturgeon in the airport and she named it Gerald. Marisol kept her voice down. "Extremely drowsy," she said. Confused when she came around. Breathing slower than it should have been. Transported downtown. Held. Released. I said, "Nobody called me." She looked at me a long moment. Then she said the sentence that turned this from an accident into a case. "We were told the father was offshore and couldn't be reached." I have never worked offshore. Not one day in 34 years. It's not a lie that bends. It's a lie that snaps. Behind us, the front door opened and Adrian came out with her purse and a clean blouse, and Marisol went silent in a way that told me everything about what she was thinking. Adrian walked up and asked what we were talking about. And this is where I made the decision this whole story hangs on. Every part of me wanted to put November down on that driveway between us and watch what her face did with it. Instead, I said, "She's explaining what they're doing for Nell." I gave her nothing. 34 years of standing in front of hostile rooms taught me one rule I'd trust with my life. When a person doesn't know what you know, do not educate them. Not out of cruelty. Out of arithmetic. The second they know, they stop reacting and start managing you. And every honest thing you might have gotten out of them is gone forever. She said she'd drive separately. And then, without a flicker, she corrected Marisol on something. Marisol had said your daughter. Adrian said, stepdaughter. It's a small word. I'd heard her say it 100 times over dinner and never once flinched. That night I heard it differently. At the hospital, they took Nell straight back, and I stood in a corridor, the color of weak tea, while a woman at a desk asked me for a policy number. And that's when it landed on me. Because my entire working life rests on one fact about this world. Events leave paper. Ambulances leave paper. Pharmacies leave paper. Clinics, insurers, billing departments. You can hide an event from a husband. You cannot hide it from an actuary. I opened the insurance portal on my phone right there against the wall, with my reading glasses in my shirt pocket and my hands not entirely steady. The November emergency was the first thing on the screen, and directly under it was a claim I'd never seen, and under that another. Different dates, different places. A walk-in clinic in West Ashley I'd never heard of, an urgent care off Rivers Avenue, a pharmacy charge from a town 40 minutes north of us. That made no sense at all. I stopped scrolling and opened my work calendar in the other window. You already know what I found, but I want to walk it with you the way I walked it, one line at a time, standing up, at 11 o'clock at night, because I don't think I breathed much through any of it. November Duluth, February Long Beach, April Rotterdam, late June Norfolk, the first Norfolk trip. Every medical event sat inside a window when I was physically on another coast or another continent. Some of them were emergencies, some were quiet little visits nobody ever mentioned. Not one of them had ever been said out loud to me. Not at dinner, not on a phone call, not in a text. 7 events, 7 absences, 0 conversations. I didn't feel rage. I want to be accurate about this. What I felt was the thing I feel at a failure site, that flat, dropping, professional calm that shows up about 4 seconds before you have to tell a client their building is coming down. I started taking screenshots. Not because I had a plan, because I suddenly did not trust anything to still be there in the morning. I called the after-hours line for Nell's pediatrician. The nurse couldn't open all of it, but she checked what she could, and she told me carefully, the way people talk when they're working something out mid-sentence, that their office had not written those prescriptions. I asked if there was any reason a healthy 9-year-old would need repeat prescriptions from clinics across town. She said, that would depend on a diagnosis. I said, there isn't one. There was a pause on that line I'll hear for the rest of my life. Then she told me to speak to the treating doctor tonight and request the complete records in the morning, and she said it in the voice of a professional who has just been handed a shape she doesn't like. The doctor found me around midnight. Priya Halloran. Small, direct, no bedside softening, and God bless her for it. Nell was stable, breathing was better. She was very, very drowsy, and the toxicology screen was showing a level of a common over-the-counter antihistamine far higher than anything that has any business being inside a child that size. The same class of medicine Marisol Vega had named about November. I showed her the portal. All of it. Dates, clinics, the pharmacy up north, my travel calendar beside it. Her face changed with every line. Then she asked me the question that made this real in a way the paperwork hadn't. Who supervises Nell when you travel? I said my wife. She didn't accuse anybody. Neither did I. She just asked me not to leave the building until the hospital's child protection team could talk to me. I sat down in a plastic chair and put my hands over my face. That's the only time that night I let myself do that. Adrian came through the elevator doors at 2:11 inches the morning. I need to describe this exactly, because it's the detail that finished me. Dark trousers, cream sweater, small gold earrings, and a full face of makeup, not smudged, not thrown on in a hurry. Done. She did not look like a woman who had raced to a hospital where a child was unconscious. She looked like a woman arriving somewhere she expected to be seen. She asked how Nell was. I said stable. She exhaled and reached for my arm, and I stepped out of range before I decided to, and her eyes narrowed maybe a millimeter. What's wrong with you? Nothing. Long night. Dr. Halloran came out and told us both, plainly, what the screen had found. And Adrian said, she must have gotten into the medicine cabinet again. Again. I've watched a lot of things come apart in my life. Concrete, marriages, companies. I have never in 61 years seen anything fall as fast as a lie does when it steps on its own tail. 1 word. 4 letters. Out of her mouth ahead of the part of her brain that was supposed to catch it. Because you only say again if there was a first time. And there had never been a first time. Not one I'd ever been told about. not one that existed anywhere in my version of our life. I said it back to her. Again? She froze, half a second, maybe less. Then her face rearranged itself into something warm and tired and perfectly reasonable, and she said, Owen, she's a child. Children get into things. I asked when the first time was. She said maybe once. She didn't really remember. She didn't remember an ambulance in her own driveway. She didn't remember telling 2 paramedics that her husband was unreachable offshore. Everything after that was theater, and we both knew it. She answered that doctor's questions with the crisp, helpful precision of somebody who has rehearsed being helpful. Where is the medication-kept bathroom cabinet? Is it locked to pause? Then no. Has Nell ever taken something deliberately, not deliberately? And then, unprompted, 3 separate times in 20 minutes, she found a way to mention that Nell was impulsive, that Nell was defiant, that Nell got very difficult when Owen wasn't around. That is not an explanation. I want you to hear me. That is construction work. She was building a child, brick by brick, in front of a physician, a child who could not be believed. And if you have ever walked into a room where your account had already been quietly downgraded before you opened your mouth, you know that architecture from the inside. Somebody gets there first. By the time you speak, the room already knows what you are. Dramatic, sensitive, difficult, unreliable. You never get to defend yourself, because nobody ever accused you of anything out loud. They just installed it. Nell was 9. She'd been getting installed for over a year. A nurse came out and said she was awake enough for 1 parent. Adrian stood up immediately. I'll go, she's used to me handling this when you're traveling. I said, I'm not traveling now, and walked past her. She was so small under that blanket. She had a monitor clip on her finger like a ring that was 3 sizes too big. Her eyes opened when I sat down, and she said, Daddy, and I'm going to tell you the truth, I did not cry at my own father's funeral, and I had to look at the ceiling tiles for a while. She said, Am I in trouble? I said, Absolutely not. She said, Adrian says I'm bad. I held her hand and kept my voice flat and level, and told her she was not bad, not in any way, not ever. She closed her eyes again, and I sat there in the dark for 40 minutes and did not ask one of the 100 questions burning through me, because Halloran had told me not to lead her, and I have spent my whole career learning exactly what leading a witness costs you later. Out in the hallway, Adrian was on her phone. She ended the call the second she saw me. Nobody important, she said. At 3 in the morning, nobody important. I told her Nell had been unconscious in November too. The color went out of her face. And here's what I was watching for. Not the denial, the shape of it. Because an innocent person says, What are you talking about? An innocent person says, That never happened. She said, Who told you that? There it is. I said it didn't matter. She recovered fast. And I'll give her this much. She was good, she'd been meaning to tell me. I'd been buried in the Duluth job. The doctors had said Nell was fine. I said she told the medics I was offshore. She said she probably said out of town. I said they remembered offshore. She said then they remember wrong. Faster, cleaner, more rehearsed with every exchange. So I quit. I said, You're right. This isn't the place. I told her to go home and sleep, and I'd call if anything changed. She stood there studying my face, trying to work out whether she'd landed it. Then she got in the elevator, and the doors shut, and I went straight back into my daughter's room. Nell was awake, looking at the ceiling. I sat down. I took her hand. I said, Sweetheart, I'm going to ask you one thing. You don't have to answer, and nothing you say will ever make me angry at you. She said, Okay. I said, Do you know how the medicine got into your body tonight? Her fingers tightened around 2 of mine. Her chin started going, and she whispered, It wasn't medicine, Daddy. Adrian calls it quiet juice. I couldn't speak, not for several seconds. And the worst thing, the very worst thing in this entire story, is that my daughter was looking up at me with the frightened, guilty face of a kid who believes she has just confessed to something. She thought she was in trouble. I kept my voice soft and asked what quiet juice was. She said she didn't know. I asked what it looked like. She said sometimes pink, sometimes just like water. I asked who gives it to her. She said Adrienne. I asked when. And my 9-year-old said 4 words that connected every date on my phone. When you go away. Not every time, she said. Mostly when Adrian's friends were coming over, when there was a dinner, when there was a committee thing, when there were people in the house. I asked what happens after she drinks it. She frowned and worked at it the way children do when they're describing a feeling they don't have the words for yet, and then she said, "My legs go funny, and everything gets far away. Like somebody put the TV on mute inside my head. I have sat across a table from men lying about 8-figure structural liability and never moved a muscle in my face. Nothing in my life ever cost me what that chair cost me." I asked if Adrian had told her why she had to drink it. Nell said, "She says it helps me calm down, because I'm difficult when you're gone." I said, "You are not difficult," she said. "She says I make her tired." And then, smaller, she says if I tell you, you'll stop going to work, and it'll be my fault. I need you to sit in that one with me, just for a second. Out of everything, the bathtub, the ambulance, 7 claims lined up against 7 trips, that's the sentence that tells you what was actually being done to my child. She wasn't only being sedated, she was being recruited. She'd been handed a job. Keep the secret, or you break your father's life, and it'll be on you. That's an adult-sized weight. It was strapped onto a little girl who still slept with a stuffed sturgeon named Gerald. I leaned in and told her nothing that happened was her fault. Not tonight. Not November. Not any of it. Not 1%. I told her she never has to protect me from the truth. Not ever. That is not her job, and it never will be. She cried. She asked if I was mad at her. I said never. Then she asked, "Are you going to tell her?" I said, "Why?" She looked at the door. She said, "She'll be mad." I said, "She can't get to you here." And Nell said, "This is the one that took me apart. She's really nice when other people are around." Children do not say that about one bad night. That is a 9-year-old describing a system and the rules she'd worked out for surviving inside it. If you were ever the kid who learned to read a room before you learned to read a book, that sentence is going to sit on your chest tonight, and I'm sorry. And I'm also glad you're still here. I asked how long there'd been quiet juice. She shrugged. Since before my birthday, maybe. Her birthday was 13 months back. I didn't ask another thing. I kissed her forehead and told her she'd done exactly the right thing. She asked me to stay. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. She was out inside 4 minutes. At 4:40 inches the morning, I opened my laptop in an empty family waiting room and did the only thing I actually know how to do. I built a report. I put my daughter's name at the top and the word timeline under it, and then I entered every claim, every date, every facility, the November ambulance run, that night's admission. And then I typed what Nell had said, word for word, without cleaning up the grammar. Because in my profession, you never, ever clean up a source statement. Quiet juice. When you go away. Like somebody put the TV on mute inside my head. 7 medical events. 7 absences. 1 responsible adult, listed on every single form. I did not call my wife. I did not accuse her. I did not warn her. At 6 that morning, I called my office coordinator, a young man named Tomas, and asked for 2 years of certified travel history. Flights, hotels, expense reports, site badge-ins, HR verification, all of it. He asked why. I said I'd explain later. It was in my inbox by noon. I laid the company's official record of where my body had been beside the insurance record of where my daughter had been, and the overlap was damn near perfect. Then I printed all of it, every page, because a pattern you can hold in your hands is a pattern nobody gets to talk you out of. She called at 12:37. How's Nell? Better. When's she coming home? Not decided. And then, Owen, about last night. You have to understand, she's always been difficult when you're gone. I wrote that sentence down while she was still saying it. I asked what difficult meant. Silence. Then a soft little laugh. What every parent does. I calm her down. I looked at the line on the page next to my hand. Adrian calls it quiet juice. I said, "Of course. We'll talk later." And I hung up before my voice could give me away. Now I'm going to do something I've thought hard about, which is be fair to her. Not kind, fair. Adrian was 38 years old. She married a man 23 years older than her and moved into a house that still had another woman's handwriting on the inside of the pantry door. She asked for a family. What she got was a husband gone 11 days at a stretch, a grieving little girl who wouldn't look at her, and a phone that rang at 10 at night from a different time zone, so a tired old man could ask if everything was all right. Everything was fine. Everything was always fine, and she was raised by a mother who kept a bottle in the cupboard above the stove. She told the investigators that eventually, and from what I understand, she told it the way you'd share a family recipe. When the evening got loud, her mother poured a little into juice, and the house went quiet, and not one person in that house ever once called it what it was. So the first time she did it, I don't believe it felt like violence to her. I think it felt like technique. The same ordinary bottle half the country keeps around for allergy season. The stuff people give kids on airplanes. She told herself it was a one-time thing, and then she told herself it was rare, and then she stopped counting. Understand her. I'm asking you to understand her. I'm not asking you to forgive her, because here is exactly where it runs out. And it runs out hard. She didn't stop after November. She stood in a hospital and looked at an unconscious child on a gurney, and instead of asking herself what she had turned into, she told 2 paramedics that the girl's father was offshore. That isn't exhaustion. That's maintenance. And this is where I have to say the other part, the part about me, because if I skip it, I'm a liar. My son stood in a parking lot and told me she was good with Nell in front of me, and I told him he was being unfair. I was 59 years old and I was lonely in a way I didn't have the courage to name, and a competent, warm, organized woman walked into a house that had gone dark, and I did not want to examine it. I did not want to read the fine print, because I already knew there'd be something in it. The rest is procedure, and I'll move through it, because procedure isn't where the feeling lives. A hospital social worker named Camille Roussel read my timeline twice and said, "You put this together today?" I told her the records already existed. I just put them in the same room. She had it escalated to a priority investigation by the next morning. She gave me the name of a family attorney, a soft-spoken man named Yusuf Bakr, who read the entire folder without interrupting me once, closed it, and said we had grounds for emergency protection that afternoon. I asked if Adrian got notified first. He said that's the entire point of emergency relief. His rules were simple and I followed every one. No confrontation, no searching accounts I had no legal right to, no coaching my daughter, nothing posted anywhere, ever. Let the documents talk, Owen. Documents don't lose their temper. The judge asked 4 questions. Then she read Nell's statement a second time. Then she signed an order barring Adrian from any contact, direct or indirect, and from setting foot back in my house. I stood in that hallway afterward and waited to feel triumphant. It never came. What I felt was permission. That's all it was. Permission to finally go and make my kids safe. Then Camille called and said investigators wanted to speak with Adrian today, and did I know where she'd be? I did. Every second Tuesday she had a committee lunch at a restaurant on Queen Street with 4 other women. And I want you to hold on to this next part, because the world does not usually write irony this clean. It was a gala committee, for a children's hospital wing. I gave Camille the address and the time, and then I stopped talking. I didn't ask what they'd do. I didn't ask to be there. Yusuf raised an eyebrow at me, and I said the only thing I said about it all week. If I'm standing in that room, it's about me, and it can't be about me. So here's the biggest moment in this whole story, and I'm not in it. I'm 40 minutes north, in a pediatric room with the blinds half down, sitting in a vinyl chair with my reading glasses on, watching my daughter color. It was 12:26. Camille walked into that restaurant with 2 Charleston County officers behind her, and she told me later the room was doing what rooms like that do at lunchtime. Silverware, water glasses, a low, pleasant hum, ceiling fans turning slow. Adrian was at the round table by the window, cream sweater, small gold earrings, laughing at something, with her hand laid flat on the tablecloth the way she did when she wanted to look relaxed. She saw the officers first, and Camille said her face did something almost hospitable. She assumed they were there for somebody else. She actually turned in her chair a little, to give them room to walk past. They didn't walk past. Camille set the certified order down on the white tablecloth beside her water glass, and said her full name, and asked her to confirm it. And Adrian said yes with a small, polite smile, still sitting on her face, because the smile hadn't received the news yet. Nobody at that table moved. One woman's fork was halfway up. It stayed halfway up. Adrian picked up the document. She read maybe 11 words of it, and she laughed one short breath out through her nose and said, "This is ridiculous. My husband is upset because a child got into some allergy medicine." Camille didn't move. Camille has been doing this 19 years, and she has a stillness I could feel through the telephone. She said the court had reviewed information raising serious concerns about Nell's safety. Adrian said, "Owen gave you that." Camille said the record included hospital documentation, prior emergency response records, pharmacy claims, and statements made by the child. And that's when it happened. Statements? Her voice went up on the second syllable. She looked around at her 4 friends and said, "She's 9. She gets confused. She makes things up. She's always—" She stopped herself. Even there. Even in the middle of the collapse, with a court order lying on the tablecloth next to the bread, her instinct was to reach for the same tool. Build the unreliable child. It had worked on a husband for 13 months. Why on earth wouldn't it work on a table full of women who had only ever heard her side of it? Nobody said a word. That's the sound I want you to hear. 4 women who had known her for years, who'd been in my house, who had complimented her patience, who had almost certainly said the words, "She's a saint," taking on that little girl out loud within the last month, and not one of them opened her mouth to help her. An officer asked her to stand. She asked why, and he said they needed her to come with them for questioning regarding suspected child endangerment, and Adrian dropped her voice to almost nothing and said, "Can we please do this somewhere private?" Image. Even then, even with the whole thing burning down around her, the first instinct was the room is watching. He said, "Ma'am, please stand." She said, "You don't understand. Owen is gone constantly. Constantly. I'm the one who's actually there. I'm the one who does everything for that child." And here's the terrible thing. That's the only sentence she said in that restaurant that was true. She was the one who was there. She was there in November. She was there in February and April and June. She was there in my bathroom on a Thursday afternoon with a candle burning downstairs. I was in Norfolk. I was always in Norfolk. That's mine to carry, and I carry it. She turned to her friends and said, "Tell them. You know how difficult she gets when he's away." Camille said it was the longest 3 seconds of her career. Not one of them moved. One looked down at her plate. One looked out the window at the traffic. And the woman sitting directly to Adrian's left quietly, with no expression on her face at all, reached over and slid Adrian's wineglass a few inches back from the edge of the table. That's the whole verdict on that friendship, right there. She didn't defend her. She just tidied up around her. Adrian grabbed her purse and said fine. She'd call Owen and straighten this out. Camille told her the order prohibited indirect contact as well. She said, "He's my husband." Camille said that doesn't override it. She reached for her phone anyway, and an officer put a hand between her and the table. By then, every person in that restaurant had stopped pretending not to look. And she said the sentence Camille now repeats when she trains new caseworkers. "Do you know who my husband is?" She still thought my name was a shield. She had worn it at fundraisers for 3 years, and she genuinely believed, sitting in that chair, that it would hold. The officer said, "Yes, ma'am." His statement's in the file. Then he asked her to stand one more time. And she did. When he told her she was being detained, she pulled her arm back and said, "You're arresting me because a 9-year-old told a story." And then she said, "Owen did this." And then she stopped talking altogether. The cuffs went on beside a table of half-eaten salads, under a slow ceiling fan, on Queen Street, at a lunch to raise money for sick children. Nobody followed her out. And 40 minutes north, my phone was buzzing face down on a hospital tray table, and I didn't pick it up, because Nell was holding up a drawing of a house with an enormous yellow sun over it and 2 people out front holding hands. She said, "That's us." I said, before I could stop myself, "Where's Adrian?" Nell looked back down at the paper a second. Then she said, "She doesn't live there." I said, "No, sweetheart, she doesn't." At 12:41, Camille called and said it's done, she's in custody. I went out into the hallway and leaned against the wall and waited to feel something enormous. It never came. It was like watching a demolition I'd signed off on myself. You know it's correct. You know it's necessary. And you still just feel old and sad and somehow responsible for the whole thing. The only moment that actually landed was back in the room. Nell heard enough to understand, and her shoulders came up around her ears the way they did, and I sat down and told her plainly, She can't come here, she can't come home, and she can't contact you." And Nell said, "So I don't have to drink the quiet juice anymore." I said, "Never again." She leaned into my side and went back to coloring. That, not the courthouse, not the handcuffs. That was the moment this thing was won. She came home 2 days later and stopped in the front hall, right about where I'd carried her, and I watched her face and got ready for it to go badly. Instead, she took a long breath and said, "It smells different in here." I asked, "Different how?" She thought about it. She said, "Like when you open a window." Nothing in that house had changed except the locks, the codes, and every name, on every list at every school and clinic and account. But safety, it turns out, has a smell. Who knew? We had waffles for dinner because she asked for waffles for dinner. We watched a documentary about octopuses because that month Nell had decided octopuses were the funniest animals on Earth. Halfway through, she asked if I was going away for work again, and I said not for a while, and she said, "Because of me?" And I said, "Because I need to be here." And then she looked at her plate and said, "I don't want you to lose your job." That's how deep it went. After everything, my kid was still sitting there doing the arithmetic on whether she was too expensive to keep. I put the remote down. I told her my work matters and she matters more, and that none of this happened because I traveled. It happened because a grown woman made a choice she was not allowed to make. Later, she fell asleep against my arm and her breathing went slow and even. And for about half a second, the sound of it terrified me, and I touched her shoulder. She stirred and said, "Daddy." "I'm sleeping," in the exact irritated voice of a 9-year-old being bothered for no good reason. I laughed out loud, alone on my own couch, with my hand over my mouth. Sleep had meant something else in that house for over a year. It didn't anymore. The months after weren't a montage. She started with a child therapist, and some weeks were fine and some weren't, and there were nights she checked her bedroom door twice to be sure it couldn't be locked from the outside. The legal process ground along the way those things do. I gave what I was asked for, and I never contacted Adrian, not once, and I'm told that surprised people. I stopped taking site work, 61, and I finally took the desk consulting I'd been sneering at for a decade, not because Nell needed a guard on the door, because I'd finally understood something that had been sitting in my blind spot for years. Providing a beautiful house is not the same thing as knowing what happens inside it when you're not there. Those are two different jobs. Most of us only ever get paid for one of them, and then we act surprised when the other one goes undone. And I'll tell you the thing that being old actually gave me here, since I've spent this whole story confessing what it cost me. I don't have 30 more years to get this right. I'm not going to be one of those men who figures out what mattered at 84 and mentions it to a nurse. When I looked at those 7 dates lined up against 7 trips, I already knew in my bones exactly how few Saturdays I've got left with that girl. That's not wisdom either. It's just a clock. But it made me move faster than the man I was at 40 would have moved, and my daughter is safe because of it. So here's the one thing you can do today, and it costs you nothing. Log into your health insurance portal and look at your own child's claims history for the last 18 months. Not because you suspect anybody. Do it because you don't. 99 times out of 100 you'll see a strep test and a well visit, and you'll close the tab and forget an old man on the internet ever said anything. That's the point. You're learning what normal looks like, so that if it ever quits being normal, you'll actually see it. And here's the question I want you to sit with, because I've been sitting with it for a year now. Who in your life has permission to tell you something you really don't want to hear, and when was the last time you made that easy for them? My son had 9 words for me in a parking lot. 9. And I made it so expensive for him to say the 10th that he never did. My daughter didn't stay quiet because she was scared. Not only that, she stayed quiet because somebody told her the truth would cost her father his job. Somebody made the truth expensive for a 9-year-old. Ask yourself honestly whether you've ever done that to somebody who loves you. I did it twice in this story, and I didn't notice either time. One Saturday morning a few months on, I came into the kitchen and found Nell making waffle batter by herself, and she'd slopped a good third of it down the front of the cabinets, and she looked at the mess, and she laughed. She didn't apologize. That child used to apologize when other people bumped into her, and there was batter on my floor, and she just laughed about it. And I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen at 61 years old, and had to hold on to the counter for a second. No courtroom on this earth, ever gave me anything close to that. All right. Before I let you go, I'd like 3 things from you, and then I'll get out of your evening. First, tell me straight in the comments what you make of the biggest decision I made, which was standing in that driveway and saying nothing. Comment 1 if you think I got it right, and the quiet is the only reason my daughter is safe. Comment 2 if you think I should have put the whole thing on the table that first night, consequences be damned, because no man should sleep another hour under that roof. Or comment 3 if you think the real failure happened long before the bathtub, that the crack in the structure was an old man taking 11-day trips with a grieving child at home, and everything after was just the load finally finding it. I have my own answer. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. I want to read yours first. And I read far more of them than you'd think. Second, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. Somebody is always folding laundry at 2 in the morning in a city I will never see, and honestly, that's my favorite part of doing this. And third, only if you want to. No pressure at all. If you were ever the kid who learned to read the room before you learned to read a book, or the grown adult who found out far too late what was happening inside a house you thought you knew, just say so. You don't owe anybody the details. 2 words is plenty. Me too. Somebody's going to scroll past your comment tonight and feel less alone because you spent 10 seconds on it. And if this one stayed with you, subscribe. I'm just one man telling stories about ordinary people who noticed something a little too late and did something about it anyway. Every subscriber genuinely keeps this going. Take care of yourselves out there. Read the fine print on your own life, and go check on the quiet ones. This is a fictional story, inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Charleston, South Carolina, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.